Hello and welcome to Palace of the People with me, Graeme Pryce. I tell you what, there's been a lot of talk about Donald Trump, the new King of America, lately. And by association, there's quite a lot of people talking about Nigel Farage too. Especially as Reform UK seem to be having some sort of weird internal power struggle or something. We've also got the Vice President of America telling blatant lies about the UK all over Europe a couple of weeks back, and Volodymyr Zelensky being also welcomed as a hero all over Europe within the last few weeks. We've also got the leaders of the EU meeting to discuss the security of Europe just a few days ago, an event to which we would have been invited if we hadn't had ballbag Spafford Johnson get Brexit done and drag us out of the EU. If we had been invited, I don't doubt that Sir Keir Starmer would have gone along in a boring grey suit with boring grey words and fulfilled his part. As I've said before, he's so grey that if he lit a candle and did a good impression of John Major in front of a mirror at midnight, it might induce the ghost of Thatcher herself to rise. But then I have to stop for a moment and imagine how different that meeting in the Oval Office would have been with the former leader of the free world. If Rishi Sunak had been sitting in that chair, or Liz Truss, or Boris Johnson opposite the Mango Mussolini himself. I'm really glad it was Keir Starmer instead, but when I mentioned his name to one of my oldest and most intelligent friends the other day, he told me in no uncertain terms that he can't stand Keir Starmer. I was a bit surprised, and it set me off thinking about a few thoughts I'd like to share with you today, right after this. I'm sorry to interrupt. I just want to take a quick moment to say that my videos often get thousands more views than I have subscribers. That can only mean that there are people watching who aren't subscribed. That's a difficult thing to deal with. Just have a quick look and make sure you've subscribed and rang the bell. Now, my mate is a smart lad. I don't hang about with idiots. Well, that's not strictly true. There is a lot of them about, isn't there? But I don't take their opinions very seriously. You can be intelligent without being interested in politics, and my mate won't have it discussed around his kitchen table, and I respect that most of the time. I felt a bit sad though, because he seemed to think that Starmer was to blame for the riots last summer, the Farage riots, and he decided that Starmer is a bad knobhead and left it at that in about July of last year, maybe August. It made me think about other people that might have very little interest in politics and the fact that they only hear the most extreme and over-reported aspects of it. It's a scary prospect, really, because anybody that does follow politics will know that the biggest stories are usually either right-wing bullshit, disinformation, misinformation, or as biased as Boris's right bollock. Obviously, Starmer wasn't responsible for the summer riots last year. We all know who was, and he was just asking questions. But my oldest mate was convinced, apparently, and I love him too much to fall out with him, over politics especially. So I dropped it and moved on to reminiscing about, I don't know, something that happened 30 years ago on a council estate when we were kids. Where does the time go, eh? Where did my hair go? Anyway, I think I'm quite a harsh critic, and I've waited desperately for the tide to turn and for the rest of the country to see what I saw in 2012 and vote the bastard fucking Tories out of office. I've never hated anything in my life with the kind of boiling, violent hatred I had for the Conservative Party by the time they were voted out. I hated them more and more with every year that passed. If I was lucky enough to have been a person with the means to do so, I would have left Britain in about 2016, 2017 maybe, and only ever returned for occasional visits to see people like my mate. There was one tiny blossom of hope in the back of my mind though. I kept thinking, every single thing Boris Johnson touches turns to shit eventually. And if he turns the Conservative Party to shit, then they won't last another 10 years. Well, I'm proud to be a man that can admit when I'm wrong, and I certainly got that one wrong, didn't I? It only took him 3 years to turn it to shit, didn't it? What a result, eh? Marvellous. Now, here's where I might say something a bit controversial. I don't think Labour would have won in 2024 if Jeremy Corbyn was still the leader of the Labour Party. I think he came as close as he was ever going to in 2017. But if he was still leader in 2024, the media would have destroyed him. They'd have portrayed him as a crazy old man, an evil socialist, a hopeless fantasist. We've heard it all before, haven't we? I think we'd have ended up with a minority Tory government, possibly propped up by a few fucking idiots from Reform UK and maybe some religious zealots from the DUP. For the record, I think Corbyn is a fucking cracking guy. I'd love to have a J2O with him on his allotments and listen to some of his old stories from the 70s and the 80s. But I think we'd still have a Conservative government if he'd have been leading the Labour Party into the last election. And it would be an even worse Conservative government than we had last time. What a horrible thought. I thought that Starmer seemed quite competent and commanding when he was working for Jeremy Corbyn, though. I didn't back him for leader. I thought it would be better suited if Yvette Cooper had won. But I wasn't disappointed with him when he did win either. I didn't think he was so competent that he'd win a general election in one term, though. That in itself is an achievement in any decade, but at a time when the vast majority of the public are utterly enthralled with social media, insidiously feeding them right-wing disinformation every single day. It's actually quite impressive. When I started my channel, I knew that some of my views were quite narrowly particular to my own situation. So I decided that I would never talk about any particular politician without at least going online and doing my research as impartially as I could about who they were and finding out a bit about them. It was this course of action that led me to realising that every single Tory MP is an absolute bastard if you look at their voting records, and that started me off on creating my 5 reasons such and such is a twat series. But I digress. I did that with Keir Starmer too, as I did with Jeremy Corbyn years before I even started my YouTube channel. And there's a few things that stand out about Keir Starmer to me, especially when compared with other Prime Ministers in our lifetime. He is quite different. Even if you hate him, just give me another 2 minutes to tell you a couple of things, and if you still think he's not exactly the right man for the job at exactly the right time, you can tell me why in the comments afterwards. I'm sure it'll be very interesting. Keir Starmer is one of the only Prime Ministers that didn't attend a private school. Most of them went to Eton. To even become Prime Minister when you aren't part of the private school mafia is quite an achievement in itself. Let's not kid ourselves though. Despite the continual "my dad was a tool maker" thing, Keir did not come from a working class background. Certainly not a wealthy background either, but not a poor one. The school he attended is now a private, public school, but it wasn't when he went there. Liz Truss is one of the other rare prime ministers that never went to Eton. Bit of a contrast there, eh? He seems to have had quite a successful career as a solicitor and a barrister. You bet if he hadn't, then the Tories or the likes of the Daily Mail or the Telegraph would have rooted it out and reported on it by now. They did have a little go at attacking him for defending terrorists in the past, but then everyone just pointed out that that's literally what solicitors do because it's, their job. And he seemed to drop that particular attempt at a smear campaign. Having apparently decided that putting his skills to use defending innocent people was more important than earning vast fortunes, Starmer went off around various countries in the Caribbean, defending people who were wrongly accused and facing the death penalty after that. When he came back, he was appointed to the Queen's Council at just 39 years of age, despite expressing support for abolishing the monarchy in his formative years. Judging by how he deals with old sausage fingers Charlie, he seems to have moved on from that view, or at least learned to not express it. That sounds like quite a cool life story so far. Can you imagine any Tory doing anything like that? Tell you what I really hate though, it's when you get people repeating this bollocks about Jimmy Savile. Yeah, Starmer was head of the DPP when the case was brought up. He had absolutely nothing to do with deciding whether the case was prosecuted against Savile though. Blaming him for it is like getting a bit of deep fried chicken head in your KFC and literally holding Colonel Sanders personally to blame. But what's worse about that slur is that when he did have the authority to do so, he actually opened a new investigation into Jimmy Savile. It's like the people who say that aren't just wrong. They're like the fucking opposite of right in every possible way. And knobheads, bad knobheads. Imagine accusing somebody of assisting a nonce because you don't want him to win an election. Fuck's sake. So maybe I am a bit forgiving of him. I agree the winter fuel allowance thing was fucking stupid. He should have been more careful about how that was implemented. And the whole thing could have been mitigated by a little bit of better communication with the public as well, couldn't it? The farmer protest thing, I think the level should have been 5 million, not 3. And I think the farm's assets should only be taken into account if they are like a big industrial farm with tens of millions of pounds worth of machinery. Not a shitty tractor from 1998 and a second-hand milking machine for the 10 cows that they own. Obviously, there was the free the sausages thing, which was quite hilarious, to be honest. But I can't think of any particular reason to hate him. I do think he's a bit boring and grey, isn't he? Let's be honest. But when I saw him have the balls to correct Trump in the Oval Office when he lied about the funding for Ukraine, or when I saw him put his arms around Volodymyr Zelensky in spite of Trump after his utter humiliation just 2 days before, I felt a little bit of pride in my country and my Prime Minister that I don't believe I'd have ever felt if Rishi Sunak was in that position, or Ballbag Johnson, or Dancing Queen Theresa May, or even Jeremy fucking Corbyn. He might be a bit of a bellend, but I reckon he's the best bellend we've got. Thank you for watching if you've gotten this far. I did a poll earlier on and let it shape the second and mostly third part of the vague script I wrote for this video. The polls are saying that Starmer's popularity is higher than ever. But my mate clearly didn't think so, did he? Obviously, his opinion was the first choice in the poll that I did. The second was an opinion of another friend of mine who's a little bit more centrist. And the third was the opinion of my very elderly aunt, who's been voting Labour for over 6 decades and assures me that she will continue to do so. The fourth option in the poll was a little bit deceptive though, and I do apologise for playing a little bit of a trick there, but that was my opinion. I've looked at Starmer's past and his career, and from what I can tell, he is a very competent man who has excelled in everything he's done in his life so far. Now, whether he can excel as Prime Minister remains to be seen, doesn't it? But I have a bit more faith in him than I would have done in Rishi Sunak, or Liz Truss, or Boris Johnson. Don't you? What do you think? I don't want to be too dramatic here, but let's be honest, Starmer might be about to face the same kind of test as Prime Ministers did in 1914 or 1939. I don't think he's Churchill, but I think we've seen enough to know that he isn't Chamberlain either. Do you still think he's a bad knobhead, like my mate does? Let me know in the comments. Your opinion is valid, even if I don't agree with you. It's fine, I still want to hear it. It's not an echo chamber. If you do want to support the channel, there's links to PayPal, Patreon, and Buy Me a Coffee hanging about oddly in the descriptions box below. And as always, the join button for memberships is also below. Now, that isn't all I have to say, but it is as much of what I've got to say as I want to say today. And I still think Starmer is very, very, very grey. Ta-ra. She's not dead. She's just very, very, very old. You alright, Anne?